Gorton.
Mr. Clarke, you got the position as the head of this counterterrorism and security group, CSG, when in about May of 1998, is that correct?
No, Senator, actually, I got it in the first Bush administration in the fall of 1992.
But it got the level of being up there at the White House and being a very important position in 1998?
What happened in 1998, let me go back. The Counterterrorism Security Group, the CSG, goes back to the Reagan administration. It's been around for that long. I started chairing it during the last few months of the Bush administration in 1992. Continued to chair it throughout the Clinton administration and into the second Bush administration. In 1998, President Clinton signed a presidential directive that created a new title for the chairman of that group. The chairman had always been a special assistant to the president. That was the title. Under the new directive in 1998, the title became National Coordinator for Counterterrorism. But I think there's something I need to say about that title. The actual title was National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism. And the press, thinking that title was too long and not sexy enough, immediately turned it into Terrorism Czar. If you look at the Presidential Decision Directive in 1998 that created this position, it is replete with what the National Coordinator cannot do and what resources the National Coordinator would not have. It was not a counterterrorism czar, especially when compared to people like the drug czar. It
was a staff position, not an action, not an action position, in other words.
It gave me all of the responsibility and none of the authority.
And later in 1998, of course, we had the explosions, the attack on the two embassies.
Right.
And shortly after that, the administration took its one military response to terrorism in the attacks on Afghanistan and the Sudan. Were those actions taken on your recommendation? Were you a part of the decision-making process and calling for that reaction?
Senator, I was, but if I may be a little picky, this was not the administration's first or only use of military action in response to terrorism. The administration began in the first 5 months, the Clinton administration, first 5 months of the administration, 6 months, to use military force in response to terrorism.
Then I'll the first to Al-Qaeda.
First time that we had an Al-Qaeda attack on the United States facilities. It was the first time that Al-Qaeda had attacked us, and we had been told it was Al-Qaeda. In retrospect, many years after these attacks occurred, FBI and CIA began to say that things like the World Trade Center attack in 1993 might have been done by an early stage Al-Qaeda.
In August of 1998, did you recommend a longer lasting military response or just precisely the one that in fact took place?
I recommended a series of rolling attacks against the infrastructure in Afghanistan. Every time they would rebuild it, I proposed that we blow it up again. Much like, in fact, we were doing in Iraq, where we had a rolling series of attacks on their air defense system.
And shortly after that, you came up with the so-called Delenda Plan, as I understand it. And is our staff report accurate in saying that it had 4 principal approaches: diplomacy, covert action, various financial members, and military action? Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes,
that
sir.
Our staff has given us?
Yes, sir.
And is our staff accurate in saying that the strategy was never formally adopted, but that you were authorized in effect to go ahead with the first 3, but not with the 4th?
Yes, sir.
And at various times thereafter, you did recommend specific military responses under specific circumstances, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Each of which was rejected for one reason or another.
That's correct.
Then in the early winter of 1999, when the CIA came up with a plan to attack a hunting camp in Afghanistan at which it felt that Osama bin Laden was present or was not present, that recommendation or that plan was ultimately aborted. Did you recommend against that plan?
Yes, Senator. What I did was to call the Director of Central Intelligence and say that I had finally been presented with satellite photography of the facility. And it was very clear to me that this looked like something other than a terrorist camp. It looked like a luxury hunting trip. And I asked him to look into it personally. When he did, he called back and he said that he was no longer recommending the attack.
Okay. So you never recommended either for or against an attack on that camp?
Well, I think I don't want to split hairs. By calling the Director of Central Intelligence and suggesting to him that this did not look to me like a terrorist facility and urging him to look into it, he certainly had the impression that I wasn't in favor of it. Absolutely.
Well, did it make any difference as to what kind of camp it was, if it was likely that Osama bin Laden was there?
Well, it did, and in two respects. The administration had adopted a policy with regard, let me back up. After the bombings in 1998, we kept submarines off the coast of Pakistan, loaded with cruise missiles, for the purpose of launching a follow-on attack when we could locate bin Laden. The intelligence that we got about where bin Laden was very poor. The DCI, Mr. Tennant, characterized that intelligence himself on repeated occasions as very poor. On one occasion, we thought we knew where he was, and there were two problems. One, the intelligence was poor, according to George Tennant, and two, the collateral damage would have been great, according to the Pentagon. When I looked at this facility, it looked to me like the intelligence was again poor, because it didn't look like a terrorist camp, and the probability of collateral damage would have been high, I thought, since I believed, based on the satellite photography, that people other than terrorists were there. The decision ultimately was George Tennant's, and George Tennant recommended no action be taken. I don't know in retrospect, your staff might, but I don't know in retrospect whether it proved to be true that bin Laden was in the vicinity or not.
In any event, every recommendation for military action or covert action from late 1998 until the year 2000 ran up against the objection of actionable, that it was not based on actionable intelligence, that wonderful phrase we've heard in the last 2 days. Is that not correct? Because of uncertainty as to whether bin Laden was present, uncertainty about collateral damage, et cetera.
That's true in describing actions aimed at Osama bin Laden himself. Mm-hmm. There were other covert action activities taken, which we obviously can't go into here, but there was a pre-existing finding on terrorism under which CIA was operating, and CIA was able to do some things outside of Afghanistan against the al-Qaeda network using that authority.
And at the very end of the Clinton administration, after the attack on the Cole, there was triggered either by the Cole or by everything else that a new set of initiatives resulting in what is called a blue sky memo. Is that correct?
That's right.
And were you a part of that? Did you draft it? Was it your plan?
The blue sky memo I believe you're referring to was part of an overall update of the Delenda plan. Mm-hmm. And it was a part generated by the Central Intelligence Agency. We, my staff, generated the rest of the update.
And the goal of that plan was to roll back al-Qaeda over a period of 3 to 5 years, reducing it eventually to a rump group like other terrorist organizations around the world.
Our goal was to do that, to eliminate it as a threat to the United States, recognizing that one might not ever be able to totally eliminate everybody in the world who thought they were a member of al-Qaeda. But if we could get it to be as ineffective as the Abu Nidal organization was toward the end of its existence, it didn't pose a threat to the United States. That's what we wanted. CIA said that if they got all the resources they needed, that might be possible over the course of 3 years at the earliest.
And then Delenda and that Blue Sky proposal, I take it, were pretty much the basis of what you recommended to Condoleezza Rice in January of 2001, covert alliance, covert assistance to the Northern Alliance, more money for CIA activities, something called choosing a standard of evidence for attributing responsibility for the coal, new Predator reconnaissance missions, and more work on funding.
That's right, Senator. The update to the Delenda plan that we did in October, November, December of 2000 was handed to the new National Security Advisor in January of 2001. It formed the basis of the draft National Security Presidential Directive that was then discussed in September of 2001 and signed by President Bush as NSPD 9, I believe, later in September.
What do you mean by a standard of evidence? I'm troubled by this fuzzy phrase, actionable intelligence.
Senator,
did you feel, and let's take the coal on that, as we've heard from Director Tenet in November and then more precisely in December of 2000, they'd pretty much concluded that the coal took place through al-Qaeda people, but they couldn't prove that it had been directed by Osama bin Laden. Was the amount of intelligence available in November, December of 2000 and 2001, in your view, actionable intelligence that could have been the appropriate basis for a specific response to the coal?
The phrase that you read, the standard for actionable, was a way of my addressing this problem. And I wanted to get us away from having to prove either in a court of law legal standard or even in some fancy intelligence community standard that went through a prolonged process that took months. I thought we could disassociate the attack on the coal from any attacks that we did on the Taliban and al-Qaeda. If people wanted to further study who was guilty of attacking the coal, and the FBI had deployed hundreds of people to do that, and CIA was saying that there were some people involved who might have been al-Qaeda, I thought, fine, if you want to have that kind of standard and you want to have that kind of process, fine, then let's separate that and let's bomb Afghanistan anyway and not tie the two together. But it seemed to my staff, who were looking at the same intelligence that the CIA was looking at, it seemed to us within 2 days of the attack on the coal that we could put together an intelligence case that this was an al-Qaeda attack by the local al-Qaeda cell in Yemen. And that is, of course, the conclusion that the CIA came to in January or February of the next year, based on pretty much nothing but the evidence that we had available to us within 2 days.
Now, since my yellow light is on at this point, my final question will be this. Assuming that the recommendations that you made on January 25th of 2001, based on Delenda, based on Blue Sky, including aid to the Northern Alliance, which had been an agenda item at this point for 2.5 years without any action. assuming that there'd been more Predator reconnaissance missions, and assuming that that had all been adopted, say, on January 26th, year 2001, is there the remotest chance that it would have prevented 9/11?
No.
It just would have allowed our response after 9/11 to be perhaps a little bit faster.
Well, the response would have begun before 9/11.
But, yes, but we weren't going to, there was no recommendation on your part or anyone else's part that we declare war and attempt to invade Afghanistan prior to 9/11.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.